Namaste, hello, and welcome to the 15th session of the National Workshop on Aesthetics titled Soundarya and Sahridaya, Aesthetic Discourses in India and the West, organized by Padasala with Sri Sankaracharya University of Sanskrit, Kalady as the institutional partner and Sahapedia as the outreach partner. A warm good morning to one and all. My name is Manu, and I am the coordinator of this event and a research scholar at Calicut University and an alumni of Sri Sankaracharya University of Sanskrit, Kalady. Today, we are glad to have Professor Dr. Nirmal Selvamony again with us, this time to give us an introduction of Neo-tiNai Poiesis. Over to you, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Manu, and thanks to Padasala and Sahapedia for organizing this event and inviting me to be part of this. Also, special thanks to Mr. Deepak and Dr. Priya. So I'm very happy to be here this morning and share my ideas on Neo-tiNai Poiesis. Neo-tiNai Poiesis simply means new tiNai Poiesis. So first I'll begin with the word poiesis. That's a Greek word which has lent us the English word poetry, as you know, poem, poetry, poetics, and all of those come from this Greek word poiesis, which simply means making. The English word poetry had broader connotations until almost, the end of the 18th century, early 19th century. It was not restricted to just the verbal art, or, what we mean by poetry, but it also included the other arts as well. People who have read Shelley's Defense of Poetry would have noticed that. Now, a similar word in the Tamil tradition is cheyyul, the Tamil word cheyyul. Actually, Neo-tiNai Poiesis is English translation of the Tamil name I have for this theory called Puttinai Cheyyuliyal. Puttinai is Pudiya Tinai or New Tinai, and Cheyyuliyal is poiesis, or poetics. Now, particularly, I want to use the form poiesis rather than poetics because I want to extend, this theory to life as well. Our everyday living as such in this planet, not just, the field of art. So, Cheyyul, the Tamil word, somewhat similar in meaning to the Greek word poiesis. It also means making and also the products so made. And we should qualify this making by saying that's actually making well, making perfectly, and those things that are made very well or in the best possible manner. That's what the word poetry, also poem also, retains that meaning, as you know. But Cheyyul is slightly special in its connotation, and it differs from poiesis in its meaning. Now, this is really, true of all of the words in any language. We do talk about synonyms, but if you really come to think of it deeply, there are no synonyms actually. What we call synonyms are just, sort of approximates, approximate equivalents. No word is really the, equivalent of another word. For example, we have about more than 30 odd words for elephant in Tamil, but each, word is not the same as the other word, which refers to the animal elephant. Cheyyul, though it's an equivalent of poiesis in some ways, is also not an equivalent. So it's not an equivalent because it means making from the inside. Cheyyul itself is a compound actually, made up of two elements, Chey and Will. So which means Will is inside, so it's making from the inside. Now, that's a special kind of making, because when you make from inside, you're completely immersed in the act, as in, acts of play, and poetry and music and dance and drama. These are all actually acts of play in which, the agent is completely immersed and, performs very spontaneously. So that meaning, I don't think, is there in the word poiesis, though it means making well, etc. So the word cheyul, I want to extend that, the meaning of that word, beyond, the field of art, that is music, dance, drama, poetry, painting, sculpture, and architecture. Beyond that, also to our everyday life. So I will be talking, simultaneously about everyday life, the making of, a new kind of life, or if you like, a new life way, which is the Tinai life way, the new Tinai life way, as well as, the creation of works of art, and interpreting them, understanding them, and criticizing them. So the word Neo-tiNai is new Tinai. It is new Tinai because Tinai is already there. There is already, Tinai, which we talked about, yesterday. So that Tinai is talked about in Tolkapiam and the anthologies, Pattupattu and Ettuthozhai, which are collectively called, Sangam literature, because they were sort of canonized in the academy. So those, talk about this Tinai, and this Neo-tiNai is not the same as that Tinai, and that is why the prefix and the adjective new or neo. So this Neo-tiNai is a social order, just like Tinai also. It's the alternative, social order or society, if you like, an alternative way of, living, a life way, if you like. So Neo-tiNai Poiesis will be the making and the establishing of that kind of an alternative social order, establishing that kind of an alternative life way, making and establishing, making works of art which represent, that kind of a life way, that kind of a social order. So that's what, I mean by Neo-tiNai Poiesis. Now, the idea of alternative social order is not a new one. A lot of, people have talked about it. A lot of religions have talked about it. So philosophies have talked about it. So we can kind of roughly talk about, religious alternative social orders and non-religious or secular sort of alternative social orders. The religious social orders, like, for example, the paradise in Islamic religion, or the kingdom of God in Christian religion. These are kind of alternative societies, imagined, kind of talked about in these religious systems. And there are also so many secular ideas of alternative social orders. Like, for example, Gandhi's idea of an alternative society, what he called a Ram Rajya, or Marx's, Marx's idea of, a kind of a communist society that would be born out of this capitalist, societies, or various utopias that are imagined in several traditions. What Plato was talking about, a republic, that we talked about in this webinar in one of the early sessions. So all of these are there, but the problem with these religious social orders is that the social order that is recommended by one religious system will not be acceptable to people who don't have faith in that religious system. And the problem with the secular alternative social orders is that, none of these is as time tested as the *tiNai social order, the primal social order that we call *tiNai. Because as I'm going to just talk about this now in a little bit detail, it preceded the state society, and it has, been there for thousands and thousands of years. And none of these secular social orders imagined by scholars and critics and philosophers has ever had that kind of sort of existence, long existence as *tiNai. So that is a strong point of, recommendation of the *tiNai society as a kind of an alternative social order. So Neo-tiNai Poiesis is not just about the making of music, poetry, drama, song, dance, narrative arts, performing arts, sculpture, architecture, etc., but also about perfect action, in short. And perfect action is also, a work of art, if you like. So the Neo-tiNai Poiesis is the making of a *tiNai-like life way. That is the chayur that I'm talking about. Now, this Neo-tiNai Poiesis is actually part of a larger thing called the *tiNai movement itself, which has grown out of two fora that I launched in the 1970s in Chennai. One was called Dialogue, and the other was Indian Knowledge Systems in the late 70s. And these were very soon superseded by another forum called *tiNai, which I launched in 1980, with the objective of researching into the various institutions that constitute the *tiNai society. So out of this, were born several things, and two of those were the courses, the academic courses, Tamil Poetics and Tamil Musicology. Out of this Tamil Poetics emerged the eco-criticism course, which pioneered eco-criticism in the Indian university system. And this Tamil Musicology, both of these courses, Poetics and Musicology, were really based on the *tiNai principles. And Tamil Poetics was more focused on *tiNai because it was just looking at texts to see how they represented, the *tiNai in different ways, not just in Tamil culture, but also from the other primal societies like the Native American tradition or the Australian Aboriginal tradition and so on. For these courses, I was also kind of persuaded to set the *tiNai songs to the musical modes that are associated with the *tiNai in which, the song is set. So Neo-tiNai Poetics actually evolved as a kind of method to read these, *tiNai texts. It evolved as a kind of a critical method, but then, quickly it moved on to a level where it was a kind of a making of a life itself. So originally it was called Oikopoetics. The word Oikos was used because this was born in the English department, where people were not really familiar with, *tiNai, but they were more familiar with the Greek tradition. So that's why the use of the Greek word Oikos, which is a kind of a, somewhat similar to *tiNai, not really an equivalent, as I was telling you about equivalents earlier. So it's not really an equivalent. But then, the ancient Greeks had this idea of the Oikos, which is a household, somewhat similar to *tiNai, because it was also a household that included not just humans, but also the non-humans, like the spirit being, for example, and the the plants and the animals, that form part of the household. But quickly, this *tiNai movement, *tiNai forum, sort of had two other branches of it. One is the Mudigar Kurumba Research Center, and the other is the *tiNai Eco Film Festival, which all promote this idea of *tiNai in different ways. Um, Now, if we ask the question, what has this ТINai group really achieved? It, I think, has given a new understanding of ТINai as an alternative social order, because ТINai was really seen as a literary device for a very long time. And it's also, made this a kind of a social movement. You can see that various people getting interested, involved in ТINai in different ways. For example, now you can find people experimenting with ТINai food, the, the food that was, available in different things like Kurinji and Malay and so on. So there's more kind of attention being paid to the importance to millets, for example, or people interested in giving importance to ТИНai plants. So you find ТИNai nurseries in several institutions. And the Tamil Nadu government itself was interested in developing genome parks or genetic parks for each of these ТИНais. And I myself was involved in one of these units in which focused on the Marudam ТИNai. So they wanted to develop these genetic parks so that the gene pool of these native species will be sort of preserved in some way in these parks. And people also, take these names of different ТИНais for various purposes, to name their buildings or institutions and so on. And some people like to trace their origins to ТИNai. Particular mention can be probably made of the Devendra Kula Velala, who consider themselves as a kind of a Marudam people, people who are descendants of the Mallar or the ТИNai pair, which I was talking about yesterday, when I was telling you about ТИNai. So they consider themselves descendants of the people of the Marudam ТИNai in some way. So you can find, people getting interested in ТИNai in different ways, in different aspects of ТИNai. But seldom do you find, people really interested in the whole thing. I mean, the ТИNai social order as such. So that is the goal of the ТИNai movement, to make people get interested in ТИNai as a society, not just a part of that society like the food or, one aspect of its culture or plant or something of that kind. But the most important thing for us is, I think today, that this ТИNai social movement, which started in the 70s, has given rise to this theory that I'm talking to you about now, the Neo-tiNai Poiesis. So it's a kind of an indigenous theory, and also you can look upon it as a kind of critical method which emerged in the 20th century. Now I would just probably move on to talk about some of the basic principles which inform this Neo-tiNai Poiesis. The first principle probably would be that reality is triadic, like consisting of humans, nature, and supernature. Now, you can also kind of subsume nature and supernature under non-humans and say humans and non-humans, but I think it's more functionally useful to consider reality triadic rather than dyadic, and having three of these constituents instead of just two. So humans, nature, and supernature. By nature, I mean that which is only immanent. And by supernature, I mean that which is both immanent as well as transcendent. For example, space, time, also, embodied spirit beings. So we may have to look upon reality as consisting of this nature, humans, and supernature, because this is particularly useful to distinguish, the state society from the industrial society. And when we come to that point, I'll make that very clear to you. So the second principle would be that, these three are actually interdependent and organismic members. So you cannot have one without the other. You cannot say, well, I would like to have only, humans and nature because I don't believe in supernature. I mean, that's not possible because that will not be *tiNai. I mean, it will not be based on *tiNai as such, because in *tiNai you simply cannot exorcise, supernature in any way. So even if you don't believe in something like that, so the belief of the system builder or critic or theorist, probably will have to be bracketed when we talk about, the *tiNai as such. And the third principle that would emerge from these two would be the interdependence of these the kind of interdependence, the nature of interdependence of these three entities. Now, that dependence, we already talked about this, yesterday in some ways. Integration, I called it, and qualified that by, naming a kind of differentiated continuity. So it's a continuity, but it's also, differentiable at the same time. So you find humans, being part of nature, nature being part of humans, nature being part of supernature, and supernature being part of nature. You find humans being part of supernature, and supernature being part of humans. So one is continuous, with the other, but at the same time, sustaining the differentiability, throughout. So not erasing that difference at any point. So that's an important principle that we need to keep in mind when we talk about this Neo-tiNai Poiesis. And the next principle would be that the relation among these members, is changeable. It changes. And we can distinguish three distinct types of change among, in the relation among these members of this *tiNai. So in our own industrial society, we can see this relation of what I would call an anarchic relation. So the nature of the industrial society is that it is built on this anarchic relation. That is what defines this society as an industrial society. This anarchic relation is also a kind of failed dominant relation. And in the society that preceded that industrial society, the state society, that is marked by a dominant relation. And the society that preceded the state society, or the primal societies, or what I would call the *tiNai society, is the integrative relation, which we discussed, yesterday. So we could see these three modes of relation: the anarchic relation, the predominantly, dominant relation, and the integrative relation. These three modes of relation characteristic of three distinct types of societies. Now, just kind of elaborate a little bit on each of these relations. In our own, society, that's industrial society, we find an anarchic relation, I told you. So why do we call this relation anarchic? It is anarchic because humans attempt to dominate other humans, nature and supernature, but they fail miserably. So this is a kind of failed relation, if you like. Now, this is evident if we look at the type of society we live in. Now, this society emerged in the 18th century with the rise of the Industrial Revolution. So industrialization meant basically mechanization of labor, which was till then, manual or basically human driven. And this mechanized production was large scale production. It was mass production, and the products that were produced in this mechanized industrial mode were homogenized kind of products. So the products were basically homogeneous, which kind of destroyed the diversity that existed in the pre-industrial societies. So it kind of increased the scale, and it made mass production, and it also brought in a kind of homogeneity in the products that were produced in these huge factories and which these machines produced. And if you look at the other aspects of society like polity, economy, law, education, media, all of these were dependent on this industrial social order. And they were also driven by the worldview of this industrial society. Now, if you look at the metropolises, these are all monuments of that anarchic worldview. Like if you look at our own capital, Delhi, you can see how it's the rate of crime is really very high in Delhi. Out of 19 cities, 28.4% of the crimes against women, we are told, occur in Delhi in 2017, 18, and 19 particularly. And these are kind of data provided by the National Crime Records Bureau. And Delhi, as you know, is also the third most polluted city in the world today. I mean, a lot of people really don't want to live in Delhi now today. So it's a kind of shining example of the anarchic relation that exists, among humans. But if you look at, the relation between humans and supernature, so we try to, dominate supernature by trying to, gain that position. But, we really don't quite succeed, but then we keep trying, and we are inspired by, our rationality and modern science. And this industrial society is based on this rationality, as you know, and modern science and technology. And also, our worldview, which we call humanism, the humanist ideology, which privileges the humans over supernature. The supernature, which was considered the center until the dawn of the industrial society, is now denied its central place. And that is what W.B. Yeats was, trying to communicate in his The Second Coming. The famous lines which we all know, things fall apart, the center cannot hold, mere anarchy is loosed upon the world. So when he said that in 1920, his speaker persona said that, that's precisely, what those lines meant. And 2 years later, T.S. Eliot came up with this, The Wasteland, which also, echoed, or shall we say, represented this anarchy in its own way. So it's not just, between humans and humans, it's also between humans and supernature, also between humans and nature. So we can see how nature has been destroyed alarmingly by humans, in the industrial society. Now, the destruction of the earth in the last 200 years, that is with the rise of the Industrial Revolution, is much greater than the destruction, since about 6 billion years ago when humans, emerged on this planet. So that's why I think the period between the Industrial Revolution and now has been named by scholars as the Anthropocene, or the epoch of the humans. It is the Anthropocene, or it is the epoch of the anthropos, or the humans, because this is the epoch that has left the greatest impact on the planet. I mean, human impact on the planet. And this impact, we've had on the society has actually increased several-fold since the last 70 years. And that is why, the period between last 70 years, that is starting approximately from 1950s onwards up until now, is called the Great Acceleration. So scientists have sort of quantified the rate of acceleration of human impact in 24 areas, both on the Earth systems as well as the human society. So if you look at all of these data, which is seen in these 24 areas, we will see how, we have really impacted nature, this planet. So we have toxified this planet, the atmosphere, and accelerated the destruction of the human and also man-nature relationship. So the basic, the cause of this epoch, I mean, what has made industrial society, that new kind of social order, is human dominance over humans and nature, and also, I think, supernature. Now, but if you really look deeper into, this dominance, you probably want to go back about 10,000 years ago, when the Epoch of Holocene emerged. Now, the Epoch of Holocene emerged, with the last ice age, and that's the epoch when humans really, made very significant, drastic changes, on the planet by destroying forests, the habitats of plants and animals, birds and other creatures, and by domesticating plants and animals. Plant domestication has resulted in irrigated agriculture, which was basically monoculture, which in turn destroyed the earlier biodiversity. And humans dominated other humans, as I was telling you, which is evident in things like the caste system, that we find in India, or the apartheid in South Africa. We've hierarchized land as the country and the wilderness, wetland, dry land. We've not only categorized, land that way, but also privileged one over the other. All of these, these hierarchization, all of these domestication, all of these indicate, human dominance. So the Anthropocene, in my opinion, commenced not with just the rise of the Industrial Revolution, but it actually commenced at the time when the state societies emerged. That's about 10,000 years ago. And that's also the time when all of these great civilizations emerged, the civilizations that we take pride in, like Mehrgar or Sumerian or Indus civilization or Egyptian. All of these are really products of human dominance. They all declined, actually, when they had destroyed their topsoil, as Tom Dale and Vernon Gill have, eminently shown. So these civilizations, and those civilizations, which succumbed to natural disasters, had already actually depleted their resources and impoverished the land on which they stood. So even if they had not been, destroyed by natural accidents, they would have anyway, declined very soon. So such is the nature of the state society, which is the creation of human dominance. The society which preceded actually the state society is what I would call the ТиНai society or the primal society, which was completely overrun by the state society. So the state society emerged by disrupting the earlier ТиNai society, which anthropologists would call the hunter-gatherer societies or small-scale societies. So those societies existed for about 80,000 years. And I would like to call that epoch, when these primal societies or ТиNai societies existed, the epoch of ТиНai or the ТиNai scene. So in this society, the ТиNai society, people foraged food. It was because there was no irrigated agriculture as such. So it was a small-scale society where face-to-face contact between people, between humans and animals, and was possible. Birds and trees, and all of those natural phenomena was possible. So their technology was appropriate and simple. And their polity was based on values, which I talked about, yesterday. And their particular, needs were ecologically viable. And they believed that humans were continuous with nature and supernature. Yet, they did acknowledge the distinctness of each and cherished the diversity in different ways. And their spirituality had not really hardened into religious systems, and their ethical values into law or scripture or priestly institutions. They saw nature and supernature as their kin. So the familial relationship among humans, nature and supernature, is the most characteristic feature of this society. And this relation was, I would like to say, hierarchic in nature, which combined equality and authority at the same time. So people and non-humans were equal and unequal at the same time. So this is a kind of integrative relation, which we talked about to some length, yesterday. So to sum up, the integrative relation of the ТиНai society changed to a kind of dominant one in the state society, and that further kind of degraded into an anarchic relation in the industrial society. So that'll be the fourth principle of Neo-tiNai Poiesis. And by way of the next principle, I could say that every text, that you would like to look at, I'm not just thinking of verbal text, but also non-verbal text, like visual or plastic, whatever. All of these express the relational mode that I've been describing one way or the other. And the next principle that would ensue from all of these would be that work of art or text may represent the characteristic relation of the contemporary society, as well as the characteristic relation of the preceding societies. For example, work of art that you are looking at now might, express the anarchic relation of industrial society. It might also, represent the relation characteristic of the state society or even ТиНai society in some ways. This would be, these modes of relation would be applicable, as I said in the very beginning, not just to works of art and text, but also to all of the actions, we perform in everyday life. So the next principle, the seventh principle probably I'd like to mention is what the critic is expected to do. The task of the critic is probably to show how the characteristic relation of a particular social paradigm is represented in the action or a work of art, and how that mode of relation is represented. That calls for discussion in detail, calls for analysis. So the relation between um, the humans and nature and supernature exemplified in a particular text calls for detailed analysis. And if more than one mode of relation is represented, the relation between one mode of relation and another in a particular text calls for critical attention. And also, I think the critic has to show how the text, ultimately contributes to or does not contribute to the reconstruction of the Neo-tiNai society that we envisage, and the new epoch, the Neo-tiNai scene that is likely to be born, that we envisage, that we would desire to be born out of this Anthropocene epoch. How, that epoch has been represented or not represented in the text, whether there are indications, in the text for the ushering in of a Neo-tiNai epoch. Does the text contribute in any way to the emergence of that new Neo-tiNai epoch? So these are what a critic would want to do in the case of a text, if he or she is employing the Neo-tiNai Poiesis, method. Now, I would just like to illustrate this with some examples quickly to show how, the Neo-tiNai Poiesis can be turned into poetics and used as interpretative tools or hermeneutic tools to look at, to read texts and history. I'd just like to focus on water, how humans have related to water, how the relation among humans, water, and supernature, has been represented in texts, coming from different societies. That's what I would like to look at. But before that, to look at the water situation, the water scenario, we can say that in the industrial society, we have, as we all know, overused water or depleted our water resources. And we have also toxified it or polluted it greatly. And we have also kind of been sort of party to the likely climate disasters which are water related. So the climate related disasters relating to water are really engineered, by the humans, or they are anthropogenic. Humans have contributed a great deal to such disasters. So let's see, how the text, how these are exemplified in the text. About this, depletion of water, I would just like to recall what Kofi Annan, the former head of the United Nations, said. Fierce national competition over water resources has prompted fears that water issues contain the seeds of violent conflict. In other words, a kind of even world war, could be possible due to water crisis. So humans have kind of precipitated the water crisis to such an extent. The scarcity of water, industries guzzling so much of fresh water, precious little fresh water that we have, and the disruption of the water cycle by deforestation and all kinds of land development, real estate, activities of humans, and all of these things, which I really don't want to go into detail right now, but just hint at very quickly. So we have overused water, but also toxified it, polluted it greatly. And all of these, statistics available from Central Bureau of Health Intelligence and Ministry of Health and Family Welfare, or the United Nations, indices about the water situation. All of these will tell you how humans have really polluted all of the very precious, minuscule amount of fresh water that is available on this planet. How they have polluted, contaminated it grossly. Now, rainwater was considered the best form of water for cooking purposes. My own mother, has collected rainwater for cooking very special dishes. But nobody would ever do that today because what we did some 40, 50 years ago, we cannot do today because the rainwater is no more pure. Because the rainwater has to pass through so many, dust particles and, all of these atmospheric dust, which kind of pollutes and contaminates the rainwater. And we have not only polluted, this rainwater, we have acidified the ocean, and we have also caused what you call, the acid rain or the black rain. So I would just like to read out a Tamil poem and then give you a translation, which mentions this, what you call this black rain. காடு கொன்று நாடாக்கினார்கள் என்றாலும் கொலை இவ்வளவு நடந்திருக்காது. அந்நாள்களில் பெய்து கொண்டே இருந்திருக்கும், தொல்லையாக உணர்ந்திருப்பார்கள். நாகர்கோயிலில் மழையென்று படிக்கையில் நரம்பெல்லாம் குளிர்கிறது. நேற்று விழுப்புரத்திலும் வெட்டி மின்னியது. மழைத்துளிகள் இனியன, நனைவது இனியது. ஜம்முவில் பெய்தது கருப்பு மழையே, ஆனாலும் அது எங்கும் பெய்யட்டும். ஆடையும் உடம்பும் அழுக்காகலாம், மழை பெய்யட்டும், அதனால் என்னவும் ஆகட்டும். My translation of this poem by Paramalai, a contemporary Tamil poet, would read like this. They cleared forests to create towns, but they would not have destroyed like now. Those days, it would have been pouring incessantly, and it might have bothered them. When I read about the rains at Nagarkoil, it cools my nerves. Yesterday, it rumbled with some lightning at Vilpuram too. The raindrops are sweet, and it's lovely to get wet. Though it was black rain that Jammu had, let it rain here too. The clothes and body might as well get dirty. Let it rain, come what may. Now, what this poet calls black rain is actually rain blackened by gathering in its fall particles, smoke, black fungus spores, or atmospheric dust. Now, besides depleting the previous precious little fresh water that's available on the planet and toxifying it, we've also engineered water-related climate disasters that I mentioned, especially the rising sea level and flooding that results from that rising of the sea level. We cause such disasters by anthropogenic activities, increasing global temperature. The Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change of the United Nations says that human activities have caused approximately 1 degree centigrade of global warming above pre-industrial levels, with a likely range of 0.8 degrees centigrade to 1.2 degrees centigrade. And global warming is likely to reach 1.5 degrees centigrade between 2030 and 2052 if it continues to increase at the current rate. So that's almost a quotation from IPCC. Anthropogenic global warming is increasing at 0.2 degrees centigrade per decade due to past and ongoing the emission of greenhouse gases like water vapor, carbon dioxide, methane, and nitrous oxide and ozone. What they call the cryosphere of the Earth, or where ice is in frozen form, especially the polar regions, according to IPCC, now those regions are losing ice and their oceans are changing rapidly. the consequences of the polar transition extends to the whole planet and are affecting people in multiple ways. So that's a quote. So global sea level rises as a threat, looming, and that threat is looming very large over all of the whole world, the entire planet, over Indians also. Now, located in this tropical climate zone, we might like to think that we are about 8,500 kilometers away from the poles. And what happens there in the poles has nothing to do with us, who are sitting here, far away from that location. But that's not true. According to IPCC, by 2070, the sea level is likely to rise by 44 centimeters. Actually, an independent scientific collective called Climate Central, a group of researchers who are interested in studying climate change. These researchers predict that Chennai harbor is likely to be drowned by 2050, and the Marina Beach is likely to be underwater. According to Professor Janagarajan, who is an expert on water scenario, in Chennai, he says that Chennai, the Marina Beach was artificially created, and the harbor was built in 1881. And this harbor's breakwaters blocked the northward drift of sand along the shore. And that's how, this beach was created. And by 2050, it's likely to go underwater again. So Climate Central has also predicted that Adaya South Bank in Chennai, most urban fishing hamlets here in the city, will also be hit by the sea level rise. And part of Kolkata in West Bengal is also likely to get drowned by sea level rise. And one of the major causes of these disasters is the melting of the glaciers in the polar regions. And I'd like to share a poem with you, which is about, the melting of the glaciers. I think probably I don't have much time to read this out, so I might just read a couple of, stanzas from this interesting poem that I came upon in the internet. It's written by one Craig Sanos Perez, and he calls it 13 Ways of Looking at a Glacier. Obviously, students of literature will know this is an imitation of Wallace Stevens' 13 Ways of Looking at a Blackbird. So here are some of these stanzas. Among starving polar bears, the only moving thing was the edge of a glacier. We are of one ecology, like a planet in which there are 200,000 glaciers. The glacier absorbed greenhouse gases. We are a large part of the biosphere. Humans and animals are kin. Humans and animals and glaciers are kin. We do not know which to fear more, the terror of change or the terror of uncertainty, the glacier calving or just after. The word calving is interesting, isn't it? C-A-L-V-I-N-G. Icebergs fill the vast ocean with titanic wrecks. The mass of the glacier disappears to and fro. The threat hidden in the crevasse, an unavoidable cause. Oh, vulnerable humans, why do you engineer seawalls? Do you not see how the glacier already floods the streets of the cities around you? I think, there's so many more stanzas, but I thought I'll give you a sample of that. So we have seen, how our relations with water had resulted in desertification, toxification, and climate disasters. In other words, human dominance has actually undermined human dominance, demonstrating the anarchic nature of our relation. And dominance was the characteristic mode of the state society also, but it was slightly different. It was not anarchic like its counterpart in the industrial society. The state society, destruction was more gradual than what it is now in our society. Now, if you look at irrigated agriculture, which is a typical example of dominant practice in the state society, that shows how we have dominated nature. So I'll just again like to give you a text, a Tamil text, and a translation of that, which is about this, irrigated agriculture. Again, it's the same poet who gave us the previous, Tamil poem, Padamalai. புஞ்சை நஞ்சையாகி ஒதுங்க நிழல் இல்லை, நிழல் மட்டுமா இல்லை, கம்பு இல்லை, சோளம் இல்லை, ஏறி படர்ந்து மாலையில் பூக்கும் பீர்க்கு இல்லை, அரவம் கேட்டு கடலை கொடிகளுக்கு அடியில் இருந்து குபீரென பறக்கும் காடைகள் இல்லை, வேலிக்கிளியின் வேம்பு நிழலில் புறா இல்லை, செம்போத்து இல்லை, குயில் இல்லை, குயில் பார்த்து பாட புஞ்சைகளின் குரோட்டனான கொன்றை இல்லை, சிற்றோடையில் கட்டிய மொட்டை அணையால் எங்கள் ஊர் பாழாகிறது, காவிரியில் கட்டிய அணைகளால் தொலைவுக்கும் காடுகள் அழிந்தன, சோற்றுக்காக காடுகளை இழந்தோம், மழை இல்லை, காடுமற்றது, சோறும் அற்றது. And here is my translation of that poem. With the dry lands becoming wet, there is no shade anymore. Is it just that there is no shade? No millet, no maize, no gourd that climbs and blooms in the evening, no partridges that stir out suddenly from under the groundnut plants at the slightest sound, no pigeons in the shade of the neem among the cactus hedge, no cuckoos, no quails, no cassia, the croton of the dry lands to inspire the quail to sing. The bare dam built on the small stream has laid waste our village. The dams on Kaveri had destroyed forests far and wide. And then, no rain. Now, no forest and no rice. So that's the poem, which I think graphically illustrates this dominance. Yet another kind of relation was possible between humans and nature and supernature, and that is the familial relation which we find in Tinai society. People in several parts of the world have looked upon land and water as mother. And I'd like to give you one instance from a modern Tamil play called Tannir Tannir, and translated into English Water, as Water by Subramaniam Shankar. Now, this play was very famous in the 80s. It was made into a movie in Tamil by the famous director K. Balachandra, and it was translated into Hindi also. And it's a very significant play in Tamil literary tradition. So in this play, we find an instance of this love-based kin relation with water. In a drought-stricken village, the villagers dig a canal to bring water from a spring 7 kilometers away from the village. And when they are about to open the sluice of the canal, a villager named Adekappan, he exclaims, and this is my translation of the play, this part of the excerpt from the play, "My mother is about to leap forth, breaking the boulders. Shouldn't we celebrate it grandly? That is why I'm getting coconut, bananas, and incense. Our mother is going to spring forth and give us good life throughout the year." Now, Adekappan is actually belongs to a caste society, which is really part of a state society. But the time, pertaining to the play, the action of the play is actually set in the industrial society. So, though the impact, the influence of the industrial and the state society is very much there in the play and in the actions of Adekappan also, what this particular persona represents here, or what the kind of relation that he articulates between him and water really belongs to an ancient society, the primal society, what I call the Tinai society. So it is that kind of a familial relation which he now invokes in a different location, a different society, in an industrial society. So I hope it's amply clear that domination does not pay. It only backfires gradually in a state society and rapidly in an industrialized society. So the only enduring proper relation among humans, nature, and supernature is the love-based familial one. So performing such actions as those which will usher in the Neo-tiNai, the alternative society that many of us dream of, is primarily Puttinai Cheyul or Neo-tiNai Poiesis. Whereas making art objects that represent the Neo-tiNai society in one way or the other can only be secondary Neo-tiNai Poiesis. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir, for that enlightening session.
Okay.
It was an interesting inquiry. He just asked because he just wanted to ask, but he was just doubted whether it would be. The question was like this: why this tinai when we represent it in verbal form? We used to write as if T and I will be in small letters and N will be in the uppercase capital letter. Is there any technical reason behind that? So
Okay.
that was.
Yeah. It's just, I mean, it's part of what you call transliteration. Like when you want to represent a non-English word in English, you want to, without making it English, without translating that into English, if you want to retain that word as it is in its original language, you transliterate. And when you transliterate, you follow some transliteration key, some kind of a scheme of transliteration. Well, at one point, I had the international transliteration scheme that was meant for Tamil. I used to have that on my computer, but I lost it. And for a very long time, I didn't have that transliteration scheme. So I kind of manipulated my own, borrowing a transliteration scheme from International Dravidian Linguistics Association. They had used something similar to what you see, this capital letter N in a lowercase word. So something like that, they had also employed, and I had sort of modified it somewhat to suit my purposes. So we were using it in our, my forum, in our journal, and in some of our publications also. But now I don't use that anymore in my essays and so on, because I have now the international translation scheme. So it's an entirely different one. So tinai would be T-I-N dot underneath the N would represent that sound. It's a retroflex sound, na, like panam, so Chenganacheri, na, that na, if you want to represent, just an English letter N will not do. So you'll have to show with some diacritical mark that it's a different sound altogether. So because my computer did not have that, a diacritic mark, I just used this capital N to caution you all that, look, I am actually using a different sound here, not the N as in, English N.
Yes, we have a few Sanskrit scholars in our university who used to submit papers, and for some purposes, they used to give us translation works. So I used to have these diacritical marks to be used during my translation, but I think there are certain rules that people know while using these diacritical marks, because we don't have that complete liberty to use that.
Right. Now I will use this particular thing like N cap within tinai to you in a mail, but what I publish will not use that anymore. I will use the international transliteration scheme. So pardon me for using that.
So the Epoch class, they just asked me whether is there any political reason behind that, or
no, not at all.
Yes, sir, that is clear. So
it's convenient.
Okay, sir. Thank you for that explanation. Now we have the queries from our participants.
Okay.
First and foremost by Mr. Swati Sudhakaran, and he just acknowledges initially, saying thank you very much for the talk, sir. And he just asks, can we relate deny societies to the principle of individuation, as in the shattering of individuation that leads to the integration of humans, nature, and supernature?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Thank you very much for that question. Is that Swati Senan?
Swati Sudhakaran, sir.
Sudhakaran. Okay, that's a different person. Okay. Well, that's a good question, and it actually adds to what I was telling you about this differentiated continuity. Now, I was telling you about how TINI, though it's an integrated social order, it also conserves the differentiability dimension among entities. But I wouldn't go to the extent of, talking about individualism. Like, I mean, of course, your question does not use that word. It only uses individuation. But if we push that a little bit, we get into individualism, which is a dangerous thing, I think. That's completely incompatible with, the worldview and the philosophy that we are right now talking about. But the certain amount of, individual identity is really respected in both the natural and the human world in TINI, whether it is TINI or Neo-tiNai, in both this the difference between one organism and the other is maintained and it's sustained, and that is necessary. But it should not be pushed too far to argue for freedom of the individual and all of those things which get into the humanist liberal philosophy, which is an entirely different thing. So TINI philosophy does not subscribe to that.
Thank you, sir, for that response. Next question is by Mr. Vedant. He wonders, first of all, he also acknowledges it as a great lecture, and he finds it very interesting that you chose the word poiesis rather than poetics. And he adds that Heidegger, in his essay on technology, talks about poiesis as an occasioning, a presencing, bringing forth of that which is not yet present. That is quoted. He quotes and he unquotes, and he further adds, it almost seems to imply the presencing that is beyond human volition. Does the Tamil counterpart have somewhat similar meaning? How do we make sense of poiesis through a Neo-tiNai interpretative lens?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thanks, Mr. Vivekant, for that question. Yeah. Well, I was just using the word poiesis because the medium of my communication today is English language and not Tamil. Because I'm talking to audience, who many of them who don't know Tamil. So that is why, I translated the Tamil poems that I used, the Tamil text that I had used, and also, used the word poiesis as an equivalent of the Tamil word. But actually the word that I want to use is Cheyyul. Okay, that's the word. I want you to look at the word Cheyyul rather than poiesis. So I think what Heidegger says about poiesis is kind of based on that, the etymological potential of the Greek word, whereas my theory kind of takes mileage out of the etymological potential of the Tamil word, where this these suffix will kind of adds an entirely different meaning that's not found in poiesis at all. So it's an entirely different kind of making. I don't think it is just presencing or anything. It's not kind of a phenomenological sort of process or activity that Chayul is really talking about, envisaging. It is more of an interrelational, communitarian kind of an action, that we are talking about, which is, I think, is not the case with the word poiesis of Heidegger. Though there are some points of similarity between Heidegger's thinking, particularly this being in the world, that sort of thing, may have some idea that's similar to this, but not really the word poiesis as such. Thank you for that question.
So, thank you for the response. And the next question is by Apu Jacob John. And the person wonders, was Pinay instrumental in the development of Dravidian politics? The translation or the substitution of the foreign words to the native words seems a prominent presence in Tamil language of all ages. Can this be justified by the influence of Pinay poetics? And that's the first part of the question. I think you can respond to that, then we can proceed with the second part, I think.
Yeah, right. Well, now today, the Dravidian parties might be interested in TINAI. And as I told you, it's a very recent interest, if at all they show interest. I mean, I'm not too sure of their interest. I know that people who are associated with the Dravidian parties are interested in TINAI. And that's why I'm saying, well, the Dravidian parties themselves might be interested in TINAI. But the cause of Tamil, I mean, taking up the cause of Tamil language, particularly, its purism and all of that, I don't think they are grounded in the TINAI theory as such. In fact, I'm saying that because the Dravidian parties, at least, in the initial stages, were rather upholding the Tamil state society, of the monarchs, Chera, Chola, Pandya, and so on, and not really the TINAI society as such. So I don't think their politics is based on TINAI as such. That's my view.
Okay, so there's a second part of the question. He just gives a statement in addition. It states that also the influence of Buddhist agonist philosophy could be the birthplace of TINAI poiesis. Many social reformers in Tamil Nadu and even in Kerala were influenced by it. The present day, wait a second, sir. The present day presents a varying sectarianisms, sorry for that, caste-wise as well as the religion-wise. What's the TINAI response to this?
Okay. You might have, thanks for the question. I mean, you might have noticed that, in my talk, I mentioned very briefly that in TINAI society, there was no institutionalized spiritual tradition or religious tradition. What we had was, we had spirituality, but it was not institutionalized. And Buddhism is an institutionalized form of that spirituality. So it is really not part of the TINAI society at all. And as I was telling you, as I was historicizing this TINAI society, I was telling you that it preceded the state society, something that goes, that was prior to the state society itself. And Buddhism, as you know, is 500 BC. I mean, that's around that time, that's when it was born. So we are talking about an entirely different social order that kind of goes way back, way before the birth of Buddhism. And so, and also it's an entirely different worldview and society.
Thank you for the response, sir. There are no more questions left for us in the chat box. I think that was the last question. Okay. I don't think that there are no chance for more questions as well because okay. I think it's time for us to conclude our discussion as well, and along with that, it's time for him to conclude the session as well. So once again, thanks a lot, sir, for spending your time with us and enlightening us with that wonderful session. So participants, So here we formally conclude our today's session of Neo-tiNai Poiesis, which was delivered to us by Professor Dr. Nirmal Selvamony from the Central University of Tamil Nadu. And so once again, thank you for your time and for accepting our invitation. And beneath all the strands we had and postponing the functions and everything, again, for your acceptance to spend more time with us, attend and enlighten us in this wonderful session. So, on behalf of Padasala team, let me acknowledge your presence, and along with this, let me thank all the participants who were part of this session, who have posted questions and acknowledged our sessions. So our next session will be on 17th of December from 10:30 onwards. It will be hosted by Mr. Sadanand Menon, critic and columnist from Chennai, on Marxist aesthetics. Hope all the participants will join us on 17th December to attend the session. Thank you all. Thank you, Nirmal Selvamony, sir, for your time.
Thank you all, Mr. Manu, and all those who asked questions. Thank you all so much. Bye-bye.
So we are going to leave the meeting, participants. Thank you and have a nice day.